So just a quick topic to go over our fullbacks, just to look at some of them and to discuss what's it called, how I feel about fullbacks at the moment. So with obviously at the moment we've got Zinchenko and Ben White as our first choice fullbacks. And at the way we play, obviously we have both fullbacks drifting inside. We've got Zinchenko playing basically as a midfielder on the inside, and Ben White playing almost like a third centre back, but at the same time he's allowed to overlap and stuff like that. But what I still think is, of course, we've got Tierney on the bench, yeah, and we know that he hasn't had the best campaigns this season, whereby he's not really been played as much, he's not been utilised that much, and there's been rumours about him wanting to leave. What I do feel is that I think we need alternative. We need an alternative fullback to the ones that we've got. Zinchenko and Ben White, they're not your traditional fullbacks, and I still think Tierney is still an important player. Of course, it depends on if the manager is going to rely on him or not. But I think his profile is an important profile that we still need in our squad, and I feel like we do need someone like that on the right hand side. We just need, because at the moment we've got fullbacks who play very different kind of roles to your traditional fullbacks. We've got Zinchenko who plays like a midfielder, and you've got Ben White who plays as a third centre back, but is also able to make overlapping runs onto the far side as well to overlap Saka. But I feel like long term, of course, this season is fine. We can play in that system against the majority of teams. But going into next season, we're going to face a lot of teams that are going to be sitting really deep. We're also going to be playing in the Champions League. So you can't really be predictable in attack or consistently playing the same kind of style. You're going to be found out. Even the coach that our style is more similar to, which is Pep, even he's had a variety of fullbacks. He started off with having Kyle Walker, who was pretty much playing as a third centre back, and then I think it was Delph at one point, who was also drifting into midfield. Then he went on to Zinchenko, who again was drifting into midfield. Then he had the Cancelo type of fullback who was overlapping, but at times can also drift deep instead. And then this season, he's playing with centre-backs, full-backs. So even Pep has realised that he's had to change things. He's not always going to be the same kind of style. And I feel like when you're going, especially when we're going to the Champions League next season, the Champions League for me is all about moments and just controlling the margins of errors. Because when you think about it, it's like, I looked at 3 Champions League finals, like the last 3 Champions League finals, and what I found there was, if you look at the deciding, how the games were decided, they were all decided by one goal, and they were decided by, if I look at the names again, mistakes made by fullbacks. So the last one was Vinicius on Trent, where Trent allowed him to make the one on the far post. The last one was Havertz on Zinchenko, when Zinchenko was still playing for Man City, and Havertz made that run around the corner where Mason Mount played the pass. And the one before that was Coleman beating Kehrer on the back post to a header. So when you look at these guys at fullbacks, you look at Kieran and you look at what's his name, and you look at Zinchenko, you realize these aren't natural fullbacks. You look at Trent, and what's the criticism of him? The criticism of him has been the defensive aspect of the game. So, and you think about it this way, you think about certain limitations can easily turn into significant moments, and the Champions League is all about moments. So if you go into the Champions League knowing that there's a possibility of your fullback being beat because of his weakness defensively, or there's a possibility of your fullback not being able to overlap because he's not good enough offensively and he's more of a centre-back. These sort of things, they may not be an issue in the league long term, because of course, like, controlling the game is the most important thing, especially in league football, because you're controlling over 38 games. The team who controls the game the most in every single game is the one that's going to win. The team who scores most goals, and like most of the time when you look at the teams who's won the league at the end of the season, you look at Man City, they're the team who's the best offensively, the team who's the best defensively, the team who controls the margins of errors there. But then you look at the Champions League, it's not always the case, because Real Madrid have won the Champions League in the past few years or whatever, but they've not always been the best team in league football. That's because the Champions League, a lot of it is all about moments. You're going to face the best wingers, you're going to face the best fullbacks. Yes, you believe that your winger, for example, Saka, should be able to dominate most fullbacks, but then there's a possibility that he's going to end up facing a fullback who's really good, and he's not going to be able to beat that kind of fullback. So then you will need support from your fullback to overlap. You see this a lot with teams in the Champions League. I've mentioned this with Ribery and Alaba, where Ribery is fantastic in the league, but what was special about him in the Champions League is Alaba making those constant overlapping runs. That helps you. These little key moments, you're either going to end up having a winger who's constantly facing a fullback, or you can have a fullback who's a more traditional fullback who's going to overlap and support him, give him the overlaps, and allows you to be able to take a chance. Because at the end of the day, some of these Champions League games end in just one goal, and then that'll be the end of it. You don't want to reach a Champions League final and then realize, like, for example, what happened to Liverpool, where Vinicius was beating Trent consistently over the whole game, but they were not able to do anything because they had no other options on the bench. So we can't go into the Champions League knowing that we have defenders who aren't the most traditional type, or we don't have an alternative to them. For example, we know Zinchenko is really good in build-up play. He's really good at receiving the high up, making the passes into the final third. But we can't fool ourselves into thinking that he's great defensively. He's not. That's not his aspect of the game. But he hasn't been exploited because of our system. Our system is really good. We're very compact. We're very organized. We get back in time and we make sure not to expose a lot of guys in isolated situations. But we're going to be playing against some of the best teams in the world in the Champions League. These situations will happen. If you get someone like Benzema and Vinicius on the counter-attack, these guys will make the right decision 10 out of 10 times. It's not like you're facing Crystal Palace or all these other teams whereby, yes, they can get into these situations with your fullbacks, but they're not going to make the best decision. In the Champions League final, it's about moments. We don't want to reach the Champions League final and we face a team who has a great winger and a great fullback who's overlapping, and then they end up doubling up on our fullback, say Zinchenko, for example, and then he's not able to defend against him, and we have no alternative on the bench. This is why Kieran Tierney for me is important, but of course, if Arteta is not interested in using him, then I feel like getting another left back should be another priority again. A more traditional guy. Yes, the way we play is to have our fullbacks inverting, but there's nothing wrong with having an alternative type. Going into next season, we're going to face a lot of teams that are going to be defending. They're going to know how we play. They're going to have watched us this season. It's the same issues that Man City have constantly, where teams are ready for them, prepared for them. You can't be predictable in your attack. And then which is why you bring a fullback on that can bring something different. Tierney came off the bench and he did something that we haven't seen in weeks at fullback. Got to the far post, made a cutback, goal. That's the kind of goal that we haven't been receiving. Why? Because we don't have a fullback that's able to do that kind of stuff, that's going to overlap and play like that. It's good to have alternatives. There's nothing wrong with having the first choice, playing in the way we want to play. But it's also good to also have an alternative that can play in different style. One thing we need to also remember is this. The way we play is not Zinchenko playing in the midfield. That's not the system. That's just his position in the system. If you see what I'm trying to say to you, that position will be taken up by somebody else, regardless of Zinchenko being there or not. So if we had a fullback who would overlap, what would happen is that fullback overlapping will take up Martinelli's position on the left-hand side. Martinelli will take up Xhaka's position on the inside. You see, Xhaka is the one who's making those runs into the like those overlapping runs and making those off-the-ball runs into the final third. Meanwhile, the player who's playing in Zinchenko's role, that could be whoever we have at left centre mid playing that role next to Partey in terms of distributing and building up play from the back. So those positions, they're not fixed. The positions can interchange. It just depends on who you have in those positions. So if we have Kieran Tierney will be on the left, Martinelli will drift into the inside, and then the left centre mid will drift back to Zinchenko's role. So it's not a case of us switching the system because we have a fullback who is not similar to Zinchenko. No, the same system will continue. The personnel will just change and the positions will just change. The only thing that's going to change is that our left back won't be the left centre mid. Our left back would instead be the left wing. Our left wing wouldn't just be on the left wing. Our left wing would instead be the left centre mid who's attacking the box. And then our left centre mid being Xhaka right now, who's the one who's attacking the box, would then be the one behind the ball, distributing the ball into the final third. So that's what would change in there. So I feel like we need an alternative, because there's going to be games where we're stuck trying to build up play, trying to get the ball into the final third, and teams are just packed and we don't have alternatives to do. Or we face wingers in the Champions League who are just very good offensively and they're trying to exploit the gap behind Zinchenko, and we need someone who's a bit more defensive. We need to have an alternative on the bench who can actually deal with those kind of situations. You look at Ben White on the right-hand side as well. Ben White, fantastic player, but he's more of a natural centre-back. The reason why he's able to do all these things in the final third and play these passes is simply because he's just a fantastic footballer. He's just a baller. He's great in the passing. We saw what he did against Crystal Palace, where he was able to consistently finding Saka between their left back and their left centre back, constantly playing nice little passes into that place and breaking their lines and finding Saka there. He's just a very, very good passer, a great pass on the ball, but he's not a natural fullback who's consistently bumping forward, making off the ball runs, getting onto the touchline and making crosses from either the byline or even before he gets into the into the wide areas. So that rotational option is this. When you think about it like this, teams are doubling up and tripling up on Saka constantly the whole season. If you had another fullback who was dangerous in terms of attacking the box, and teams fear that if this guy gets to the touchline, he's going to put a cross into the box and he's going to be dangerous in attack or even make off the ball runs to try and get in on the end of chances. Think about Andy Robertson and Trent. Teams will be focused on them, yeah, and they'll be there'll be less focus on Saka. Saka gets double teamed and triple teamed more than Salah. Why? Because Trent is on that side. The same with Mane on the opposite side because they had Robertson there. So so I feel like we still need to have an alternative on the right hand side as well, in terms of right back who can offer something different in profile to what Ben White is offering. It's not a case of who's first choice or who's second choice. It's about having a great squad of players with various profiles. It's not always having, you don't always have to have the same profile. Having the same profile on the bench doesn't help you change the game. If you bring on the same player of the bench who offers the same thing on the pitch, he's only going to do the same thing that's been happening throughout the game. But if you have a completely different profile on the bench, that then gives you something else, that gives the opposition another question to answer. And then through them trying to answer this question, there's going to be gaps created, space created, more opportunities for other players, and then you can exploit them. So again, as I've said, we've seen loads of fullbacks being exploited in the Champions League, and we've seen the past 3 Champions Leagues being dictated by just one singular goal. And when I went back and watched those goals, as I mentioned before, mistakes from fullbacks. So we don't want to be in a situation whereby we're having consistent mistakes. As I've said before, you don't want to have a liability in the squad. I'm not saying these players are liabilities, but I'm saying you don't want to have an area of the pitch where there's limitations, where it's like, oh, this guy is good, but the team has to play in this sort of way for him to be good. Or these players are good, but we have to play in this sort of way for him to be good. You don't want to have too many limitations in the squad, because in the Champions League, as I've mentioned, it's about moments, and teams will find and exploit this. I have a feeling this is probably why Pep has gone with defenders playing at fullbacks, like centre-backs playing at fullbacks this season, because he's chasing that Champions League and he's seen what's happened in the past. What he saw, what happens to Zinchenko in the Champions League final, and the game ended by just 1 goal. So I feel like when you have kind of limitations in the squad, where there's gaps in the squad that you feel like there's flaws here and there that could be exploited, you need to have alternatives in the squad to make sure that you can address that. And it's not a situation whereby you reach the glory, though, or the land of glory, or whatever, you reach the Champions League final, the biggest moment, only to then realize that, oh, this gap that's been there the whole time is being exploited and there's nothing we can do about it. But yeah, those are my thoughts in terms of fullbacks, and I feel like we need to get alternatives in that sense.